All right, let's get started. It's now 3 minutes past. I'm sure some folks will still join us, but thank you everyone who's joined us today. We really appreciate your interest in the topic. My name is Amric. I am the director of the customer success team at Dubility, the makers of the SurveyCTO data collection platform. We're really pleased that you've chosen to join this installment of our webinar series. We're here today to learn a bit about web form localization. While it has been possible for a while to provide translations to the questions that you want to ask in a SurveyCTO form, our web form interface has only been available in English historically. That is until recently. For a more full web data collection experience, you can now make sure that web forms are localized into the language that the respondent prefers or speaks best. I'm joined today by Melissa Harris, who is a global digital meal advisor on the digital meal team at Oxfam, based in the UK. Oxfam are early adopters of our web form localization functionality, who have some experience of it to reflect on. Not only that, Melissa is here in part to share some perspective on the value and importance of localization with data collection. Although I understand it goes much further as far as a perspective for Oxfam beyond web forms. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward, so I'll hand over soon to Melissa, who will share on a high level how web form localization fits into and improves the work that Oxfam are doing. There'll be a lot to learn and generalize from. Following that, I'll provide a quick overview on the steps to localize the web interface in your web forms. Before I hand over to Melissa, I'll briefly mention the Safe People and Data initiative. This initiative has been spearheaded by the team at Dubility, and we're looking to grow it through participation and support of SurveyCTO users, but also the broader community. We're aiming to look beyond technology, which is still really important to us and to others, but also to focus on best practice for safe data collection, which can involve a mixture of methods and tools, as well as a web data collection, which actually fits in very nicely. We'd really like to hear from those in the audience if you've been trying to adapt and change your work in response to current circumstances. If any of the changes that you're making to your work fall inside the scope of this initiative, we'd really like to learn about your experiences. Take a look at the homepage for the initiative to learn more, but we invite you to write to us. It's always possible also to showcase some of the more impressive things that people are doing as part of this webinar series. So, like many of you, Oxfam have also been thinking about the safety of researchers, beneficiaries, partners, everyone who's part of their value chain. And web forms can certainly be an ingredient in safe data collection strategies. And for that to be effective as well as safe, it's really important that we solve for localization. So that's my argument for the importance of this. For now, I'm going to hand over to our guest, Melissa Harris from Oxfam. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us. Please take it away. You should be able to take over the presentation.
Thank you, Amric. Just to confirm, you can see my screen okay?
Not yet. Yes, I can see your screen.
Perfect. Great, so thank you so much for inviting us here today. As Amrit said, I'm Melissa and I am a digital meal advisor for Oxfam Great Britain. So within Oxfam, we have a team of us who work at looking at how technology can support program implementation and basically make our programs more effective, more accountable, and just generally stronger. So for anyone who doesn't know, just a bit of background on Oxfam. So we're a global organisation and we deliver humanitarian and development projects. We currently work in around, I think it's over 60 countries, maybe around 67 across 5 continents. Most of our work is around water and sanitation. We also do work on women's rights, inequality, climate change, and more recently, we've been responding to the coronavirus pandemic, so supporting communities that are most affected by that. In a lot of the contexts where we work directly. We do direct implementation. So this means we have Oxfam offices in country with staff employed by Oxfam who deliver our programs. But more often, and the direction we're moving towards, is actually what we call being partner-led. So the idea is that we support either financially or technically smaller organisations, often local to the country in which we're working. And we believe that to be a more effective way of programming. So we're moving more towards that model of working through partners rather than direct implementation. So some background on our relationship with SurveyCTO. So back in 2016, Oxfam we did an extensive piece of research into mobile data collection. It was quite new for us at the time. And we were looking at all of the providers and assessing them in lots of different things, the cost, the technical capacity, the usability, all of these types of things. And from that process, SurveyCTO became one of our approved standard organizational tools that's approved across our confederation. We've described it before as one of our most valuable tools, which it certainly is. And we use it for a massive range of data collection. Externally, at country level, we use it for things like needs assessments, so assessing the needs on the ground, possibly after a crisis. We use it for things like registering households, so for distributions, cash transfers, as well as we have a program, which I'll talk about a bit later, about how we capture and manage feedback from communities. We've also recently been using SurveyCTO's CATI function as well, which has been really great in terms of our COVID response, so remote data collection. Internally, we use it for a number of things as well, like activity tracking and audit and compliance purposes. So we really use it across a very broad range of activities, both here in head office, where I'm based in Oxford, and at the country level. So SurveyCTO is used in 22 of our countries, so around a third of the countries we operate, and we expect this number is only going to keep increasing. I think the map is slightly out of date, but you can see we have a lot of countries using SurveyCTO in the Middle East, West and Eastern Africa, Asia. I think the South America map is slightly out of date. I'm sure we have a lot more countries in that. But as you can imagine, if we're operating in that many countries, we are also operating in a lot of languages. In some contexts where we work, there will be more than one language. So we might have different dialects. In most instances, a country would have their own server, but we do have instances, we call them multi-country programs, where there might be a server set up for one project, which is accessed by 5 different countries. So when we went through that selection process to pick a tool that we wanted to use for mobile data collection, the ability to easily add translations, flick between languages within the same form was a really key consideration for us, which is one of the reasons we were led to SurveyCTO. As Amrit said, that has always been a feature within SurveyCTO, the ability to upload translations. And as Oxfam, we'd never really considered it to be a disadvantage that the interface wasn't available also in translation. It was working quite well for us to be able to upload the translations. However, as soon as we were sort of told by SurveyCTO that this was going to be a new feature, we realized that it was actually going to massively change the way we collect data, and a real kind of shift for us in terms of how we operate as an organization, which I'll come to talk about. But it was a really big step for us. There are some very immediate, obvious advantages of using localized web forms. So, as I said, in most where we operate, we'll have country teams, often which their English is perhaps their second, third, fourth language. So the ability to operate SurveyCTO in a language of preference is really important to us and makes it a lot easier for them to do their jobs. In terms of enumerators, similarly, we will recruit usually daily workers from the areas where we are going to collect the data. English might be limited, and for things like if there was ever a technical issue using the app when we're in the field, that ability now to see that in translation is going to resolve, we know it will resolve problems a lot quicker. Enumerators who don't necessarily speak English or read English can fix those problems in their language of preference, which is really useful. So far, we've contributed Arabic and Burmese. We have lots of programs across the Middle East, so Arabic was a really useful one for us. And we have a big program in Myanmar as well. We are planning, we've had interest certainly from teams in Somalia and Nepal to contribute some translations as well. So we're anticipating that we're going to keep adding. When we shared the feature with a lot of our teams, they were excited and really want to see their own languages as available, because it will just make life a lot easier. However, for us, and I think this is the most important part, is it's much more than just being able to see the app in translation. And it's a very timely update on behalf of SurveyCTO in regards to a conversation that we've been having as an INGO about shifting power within our organization. So for anyone who doesn't know, the sort of shift the power movement is this idea that within the international development sector, large international organizations like Oxfam hold a lot of the power and resources and finances. And internally, we're sort of really thinking, how can we better share these within the sector? I talked earlier about we work a lot with smaller national organizations, and it's our belief that they should be the ones, in most cases, implementing. They're much better placed, they know the context, they can work a lot more effectively than we can. So it's how can we support them in that process and relinquish some of the power that we have in that dynamic. So in regards to data collection, we have been looking for sort of practical ways that we can shift power in the way we collect data, making sure it's not extractive, top down. It's, less power being held by Oxfam effectively. We think, therefore, that the step of making the web form interface in translation is a really important first step towards that sort of localization, as it doesn't require English. Basically, previously, as Ulrich said, we've had the translations available, but the whole interface has always only been available in English. And from our perspective now, I guess that was a direct contradiction of our desire to shift power. Having it in translation and localized languages of preference opens up a lot of doors for us. In regards to enumerators, firstly, and staff, we said how this makes it easier for people to use the system, which is true, but I think we can go beyond that. It's very likely that historically, we as an organisation have recruited enumerators on their ability to speak some level of English because of the requirements of SurveyCTO and other systems we've used, that having that, the ability to read technical issues, sort of navigate the system in English has always been an advantage. And through that, it's very possible that we have overlooked more important skills. So as we all know, with data collection, it's a massive skill to be able to do that. You need good knowledge of data collection ethics, interpersonal communication skills, and these are much more important. And it's very possible that we've overlooked those, favouring someone who could speak English instead. Also, we know from research that Oxfam has done previously that in some instances, if we're recruiting enumerators because of ability to speak English, it's very possible that there is, they're coming from and not in not all contexts, but in some, from a certain socioeconomic background, which might actually force quite a gap between the interviewer and the interviewee. They might be from different cultures, different social statuses, things like this. Ideally, we want to be making sure that there isn't that power dynamic between who is collecting the data for us. We want to make sure that the person who's being interviewed feels as comfortable as possible. And the ability to now the whole app is available in translation. It's going to make that process a lot easier. We're not going to be recruiting on the basis of needing English as a skill, and we can do it. We can recruit basically for other reasons and focus on the skills and knowledge of the community, and if they're appropriate to do that data collection. In terms of communities, we also think that having the web form in translation and having the app in translation, it's much more transparent. In terms of, in most cases where we do data collection, the enumerator will sit down with the interviewee and they'll be able to see the screen of the device that they're collecting the data, whether it's a tablet or a smartphone. In a lot of the communities where we collect data, digital literacy and comfort is perhaps quite low. And we feel like it's intransparent of us to be asking people often sensitive questions at a difficult time and then putting it into a system that is not in their preferred language. So we think that this is a lot more appropriate for that sort of kind of data collection. People have the right to see where their data is going into, see that system and understand it. Finally, and I'm going to talk about this more in one of the examples I'm going to share, but we talk a lot about being partner-led and how that is a model we want to move to as an organisation. And for that to work, our systems need to be as inclusive and accessible as possible to our partners. We have worked, we've had the resources to work on a lot of internal, like I said, our feedback mechanisms, our registration processes that all work through SurveyCTO. We've had the resources to design and sort of strengthen these. And they need to be available to partners to use if they wish. Very much being, if they want to use our systems, they should have the option to do that. And whilst the lack of translation is not necessarily an absolute barrier, there have always been ways around it. We've operated like this before without having it. It's not been a deal breaker, but it's certainly going to make it a lot easier for us to share our systems now that they're accessible in a preferred language. So just to end, I want to talk through two examples that we have that I think sort of capture already. I mean, like you said, Emmerich, it's only been out a couple of weeks or maybe a bit longer, but we're very much in the infancy of getting to grips with this new feature. But we're already seeing some massive benefits from our side. One example being in Yemen. So we have a feedback mechanism that operates in Oxfam, Yemen, that uses SurveyCTO. So data can come through lots of different sources, so suggestion boxes, hotlines. It's entered, we use the case management feature of SurveyCTO. The data comes in and is then allocated to a specific focal point for follow-up. Recently, it came to our attention that Facebook was also being used as a way of sharing feedback with Oxfam. We never want to close down avenues that are actively receiving feedback because that shows that that's an accessible platform, it's working, but we needed to make that process safe. We didn't want data just being set on Facebook, we weren't comfortable with that. We needed to have a way of systematically capturing that and then managing it how we were other pieces of feedback. Previously, we'd sort of considered using public web form. So sharing a web form that could be accessed through through the Facebook page, people could enter data. But we always felt a bit uncomfortable with that because yes, the form was in translation, but the rest of the interface wasn't. And again, to us, that's a barrier to trust. It's, you've already been redirected once from Facebook to another sort of web form. We need that process to be as smooth as possible. So for us, now we have the option to have that web form in Arabic. We are feeling a lot more confident, and we're in the process of building that at the moment. So someone would be able to go through Oxfam's Facebook page, be reached through be sort of redirected to a web form, and then would be able to give their feedback directly to us through that system. And the whole thing would be available for them to read in their language of choice. Another example is a global program that we have called Your Word Counts. This has been one of our sort of big projects over the last sort of 3 to 4 years. And basically it uses the case management system of SurveyCTO to manage feedback. It's currently live in about 8 countries, mostly in the Middle East. And we've got the platform now and the system to a place that we're very happy with. It's working really well. The countries that have adopted it, we've done evaluations, it's working fantastically. But the next thing for us was always going to be, how do we integrate partners into that process? Or at least give them the option to, more importantly. So we've been having a think about how we can make this sort of a packaged open source piece of software that people can use as partners, as well as just Oxfam countries themselves. And we've recently received some funding from UNICEF in Gaza to actually replicate some of the work we've been doing with SurveyCTO system, using that case management across other smaller organisations, which is a fantastic opportunity for us as Oxfam. Again, that was never a complete barrier to us. We were going to do this regardless. We would have been able to have the forms translated, but we can go into that process now a lot more confident that as we share the system with partners, they can see most of the web form, most of the app in their language of preference, which is going to make the process a lot more sustainable. That transition, especially when we are working with partners who are perhaps have not used mobile data collection before and not super familiar with it, it sort of takes down one of the other unnecessary barriers of language to that process and makes that transition a lot smoother. So we're really excited about that, and we think the whole process is going to be so much easier now that the forms for us are available fully in Arabic.
Thanks, Melissa. That was really great. I just wanted to add a little bit more to our presentation today, just to solidify your understanding of this functionality in case any of it is new to you. I'm hoping you can see my Chrome window again. I wanted to illustrate 2 things briefly so that you understand the technical side of web form localization functionality. That's just before we move on to the Q&A section of our presentation. So first I want to show you how web forms can be dynamically localized, including the interface, depending on the person who is filling out the form's browser language. And to illustrate this, I'm going to use a built-in sample form, this one, which shows you how to provide an alternative set of language labels for your form design. This form's default language is English, and it has an additional non-default language, Spanish. So let's take a look at this form's behavior first in my default browser, Chrome. My instance of Chrome is set so that English is the preferred language of the browser. So if I tap on fill out, I'll start to fill out the form in English, and you can see all the buttons and the labels are in English. But I do have the option of picking another language if available from the language picker menu, which we've improved as of the recent version of SurveyCTO. I can swap to Spanish, and indeed, now all of the controls as well as the labels are now available to me in Spanish. However, what if I preferred Spanish right from the beginning? It might be confusing or unintuitive for me to find this language picker if I'm confronted by an interface that I just don't understand and labels that I can't read. It's very understandable that a respondent might have a problem proceeding. So let's take a look at what happens if the browser language, in this case, is set to Spanish. So what I will do is I will copy the URL for the web form, and I will swap back to another browser, the Firefox browser, and I'm going to paste this link in. Let's see what happens. Okay, so you can see that the interface and the labels have been provided in Spanish. I can start to complete the form. One thing you will notice is that the form's title doesn't change. That is still available in just a single language. But the interface itself and all of the labels that you include to match that language will appear in the target language. And again, if I happen to prefer a language other than what is provided by the browser language, I could swap using the language swapping option. So our hope is that this will make web forms much more intuitive. So going back to the server console on the Collect tab, if you look at the settings for the form, this is governed by this auto detect browser language option. With this option enabled, the behavior that you just saw will take place. The SurveyCTO system will try and provide the person who opens the link with a version of the form and a form interface which matches their browser language. So what you do is save, and from there you can distribute the web form link. So one other thing I want to show you just before we move over to Q&A is how to install your own custom translations. As Melissa had explained, the team at Oxfam have prepared both Burmese and Arabic translations for SurveyCTO. And if you visit the links that I've shared in the chat, you will be able to learn more about installing translations, and you'll also be directed to the translations that Oxfam have generously shared. But if you are an admin on your server console, under your server settings, if you click on languages, you'll see the 4 SurveyCTO managed translations. I happen to have the Arabic translation created by the team at Oxfam installed on the server too. But what if there's some other language that you want to cater for? Well, you could either translate it yourself, or you could double check that somebody hasn't already done it. Just to share as well, Portuguese for both continental and Brazilian versions of the Portuguese language are also available. So please don't go translating Portuguese yourself from scratch. But okay, let's say you want to prepare your own translation. You need to download a template to fill in translations. So all you do is click on the download translation template option, and you'll choose the language which you want to translate from. So think about the language that your translators understand as well as the language that they'll translate into. I'm going to pick English. All right, so I've downloaded a CSV file. And what I'll do, I'm going to open an Excel workbook and I will import this CSV file. So I'm importing a CSV file from this menu. Excuse me, I'll just find the folder quickly. All right, so I picked the file. I just need to choose the delimited option. It's comma delimited, and from there I can finish my importation process. So this is what the template looks like. It is a bit of work. There are some 200 strings that make up the interface. And the task is as follows: to translate this into that column. So learn more in this case would be translated into another language. The context here helps the translator understand what the translation is for, so they can provide accurate translations which are not confusing. So that's the simple side of this. I will provide a couple of tips as well. You can reorder these columns. The order is not important. If you want reference translation right next to translation, which might be more convenient, by all means, reorder these. The only thing you need to upload is a file that contains the term and the translation column. There's also a cheat that you can get started with. If you are familiar with the Google Sheet alternative to Excel, what you can also do is use Google Translate to get you started. Now, Google Translate is not the same thing as a human being who translates one thing to the next. It's much faster, but it's not necessarily more reliable in every instance. So while you can start with Google Translate, I would definitely have everything checked by a person. So you may or may not know this, but Google Translate has a function in Google Sheets. Here I'm translating this string into English, from English into Zulu. So I can do that, and I can also auto-complete down the column, and all of the Zulu is automatically output. But there are likely to be some problems, so please don't just assume that all of this is correct. So what you can do from this point, assuming that it is correct, I'm just moving quickly so you can see all of this. I can download the translation so I can import it into the SurveyCTO console. You can do that as a CSV, but also to highlight something new for SurveyCTO users who are not new to SurveyCTO. You can now upload Excel workbooks to SurveyCTO in a range of places as preload data, to populate server data sets. So let's do that. I'm going to install this Zulu translation. So we had downloaded the template, and now I'm going to upload this, this translation table. Okay, so here is my file, and you can see that Excel files get converted just briefly. So you do need to confirm the translation. Just ideally have somebody who understands the language have a quick look up and down this. Even if you don't understand the translation, have a look anyway, see if anything seems strange, if the formatting of something appears broken. Just have a quick look. Otherwise, you will need to name the translation. The language name is what you see on the server console, and the language label is what you will see in the drop-down menu in web forms. If it makes sense, if an image is available to represent the language, like the flags that you've seen, you might upload that. But it might take some research, because not every language is synonymous with a national flag. All right, so mapped languages. You can select the form languages which this language should be mapped. So on this server, I don't really have many forms installed. So you might need to have some forms first, but Zulu might be referred to as Zulu, ZU, it depends. You would just capture in each case however the language is referred to inside forms, and you can also scan forms for suggestions. And lastly, you want to match a browser language. So Zulu was easy to find. You just search through the official commonly used list that we happen to have here. And from there, you save your changes. And I've just installed a custom translation. If any of my strings were missing, English would be filled in as the default because of this setting. So just configure your defaults as well if you expect or are concerned at all that there might be flaws in a translation. But if there is anything missing, the upload and validation step will help you understand whether something went wrong. Okay, so that's everything that I wanted to show you following Melissa's excellent and very interesting presentation. I wanted to show you how web forms can match the language of the browser language, and also how to install custom translations. All right, thank you very much all. Please watch your login page for your server console for announcements about future events. Also, we tend to promote events and ticket footers as well. All right, have a good evening or morning or rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.